Every man eventually learns the same forbidden truth. Women aren't difficult, your fear is. Because the more you care, the less you are seen. And the moment you become indifferent, the entire game twists in ways no one warns you about. It doesn't twist because she changes, it twists because you do. And once you see the mechanism behind this shift, you can never unsee it again. Before we go deeper, follow now. If you want more insights like this, hit the subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear isn't comfort, it's revelation. There's a moment in every man's life, a moment he doesn't talk about, not to his friends, not even to his future self, a moment where he sits alone, heart cracked open, ego bruised, wondering why the woman he wanted most slipped through his fingers. He replays every conversation, every joke, every message, searching for the exact point she lost interest. But he never finds it, because the point was never in her actions. It was in his energy. You see, a woman doesn't drift away because of what you did. She drifts because of what you felt. Fear, expectation, emotional reliance disguised as interest. She can sense that weight the way you can sense a room filled with smoke. And once she feels it, the balance shifts. She becomes the chooser, and you become the one waiting to be chosen. But here is the part most men never realize. She doesn't pull away because she wants power. She pulls away because she wants certainty. And certainty dies the moment you place your emotional survival in her hands. Indifference is not cruelty. Indifference is clarity. The clarity that says, I want you, but I do not need you. I enjoy your presence, but I am whole without it. That clarity is rare. And in the modern world, rare things create gravitational pull. Imagine this: a man standing in a crowded room, unmoved, unbothered, unshaken by the noise. He is not cold. He is not detached from life. No, he is anchored. Everyone else is drifting. Everyone else is reacting. He chooses when to act. He chooses when to feel. He chooses when to give his attention. That is the essence of indifference, not emptiness, but sovereignty. Women aren't drawn to men who chase. They're drawn to men who choose. Men who choose themselves first. Men who carry their own internal kingdom, rather than seeking shelter in someone else's. And the moment you stop trying to win her, you start winning the moment. There is a reason the strongest men are rarely the loudest. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It radiates silently, like heat from a flame. And women feel that heat long before they understand it. Yet here's the twist. Most men never reach this level of detachment because they fear rejection more than they crave self-respect. They fear losing her more than they fear losing themselves. And so they grip tighter. They text faster. They care louder. They suffocate the very thing they want to keep. And every time, it slips further away. But what if I told you the thing you fear most? The loss? The withdrawal? The sudden coldness was never the enemy. What if it was the invitation? The moment the universe asks, will you cling or will you ascend? Most men cling. They cling because they believe attachment is proof of loyalty, proof of desire, proof of intention. But attachment is not desire. Attachment is fear wearing the clothes of devotion. And fear, my friend, is the scent that kills attraction faster than silence ever could. There's a moment, an invisible shift, when she feels the weight of your emotional dependence. She won't say it. She won't articulate it. She might not even understand it fully, but she feels it. And instinctively, she pulls back not to punish you, not to test you, but to breathe, to see if you are grounded or if you will crumble. Women don't test strength. They test structure, the structure of your identity, the structure of your presence, the structure of your emotional discipline. Because deep down, whether they admit it or not, they want to feel that the man beside them won't collapse under the slightest pressure. Yet here is where your transformation begins. She isn't looking for a man without emotion. She is looking for a man whose emotions do not betray him. Understand this. Indifference is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to be ruled by it. Picture this. You're sitting with her. She laughs. She touches your arm. She tells you stories she doesn't tell anyone else. But you don't cling to the moment. You don't try to freeze it in time. You don't build a future fantasy around it. You let it breathe. You let it flow. You let her feel your interest. Yes, but not your dependence. That is what separates the masculine center from the boyish impulse. Men lose women not because they care, but because they can't carry their care with stability. Let me ask you, something rhetorically, silently, in that space between your thoughts. Why does she lean in when you pull back? Why does she text you first on the days you're busiest? Why does she chase when you stop trying? It's not magic, it's not manipulation, it's human nature recalibrating. When you stop reaching, something strange happens to the balance. She becomes aware of the silence, aware of the space you are no longer filling, aware of her own desire echoing inside it. You leave behind not a void, but a vacuum, one that pulls her in, because it pulls at her curiosity, her pride, her instincts, her sense of connection. She begins to wonder, why doesn't he feel like the others? Why doesn't he chase? Why doesn't he crumble? This is where the first shift of power emerges, not through force, but through restraint, not through pursuit, but through presence, not through proving yourself, but through remembering yourself. And once she feels that shift, something ancient awakens inside her. Respect. Respect. True respect isn't earned by being agreeable, by being available, or by proving your devotion. It's earned by being centered, by living in such a way that your world does not collapse when someone steps out of it. A man who can hold his own gravity becomes a rare constellation in a sky crowded with collapsing stars. She feels that. She notices it long before she admits it. But here's where the story turns darker, not darker in cruelty, but darker in truth. When a woman senses that you fear losing her, she begins to unconsciously test reality. Not to punish you, not to manipulate you, but to confirm a question she doesn't even know she's asking. Is his strength real? Or is it borrowed? You will notice these tests in the quiet spaces, the delayed replies, the subtle emotional distance, the moments where she watches how you react more than what you say. Most men panic. Most men chase. Most men crumble beneath the pressure of uncertainty. But you are not most men, because you understand something they do not. A test is not an attack. A test is an invitation to rise. Every moment she steps back is a mirror held to your inner world. And most men never look into it. They rush to fill the silence, to repair imaginary damage, to reassure themselves more than her. But if you hold your ground, if you breathe through the discomfort, if you do nothing but remain whole, she begins to feel something new. Not superiority, not control, but security. The kind that says, I do not vanish when you step away. I do not tremble when you grow distant. I do not lose myself when I feel uncertainty. This is the essence of indifference, not the cold shoulder, but the warm spine, a quiet strength, a calm unshakability, the ability to stay present without becoming dependent. Think of how the ocean meets the rocks. The waves crash, retreat, crash again, but the rock remains unmoved, not rejecting the water, not chasing it, simply existing in its own nature. That is masculine indifference. You don't push away, you don't pull in, you allow. And what happens to the water? It returns, again and again, drawn to the thing that does not collapse under its motion. You become an anchor in a world of drifting identities. But let's go even deeper into the shadows most men avoid. The truth is, you have been conditioned to chase, conditioned to prove your worth, conditioned to believe that love must be earned, that affection must be secured, that presence must be validated. And because of that conditioning, you never learned the deeper art. The art of sitting with your own discomfort, the art of holding tension, the art of letting someone walk away without feeling like you are losing oxygen. Indifference is not about ignoring her. It's about no longer abandoning yourself. And once this truth sinks in, something remarkable happens. She no longer becomes the center you orbit. She becomes someone who gravitates toward the center you already are. In this shift lies the beginning of power, the beginning of balance, the beginning of emotional sovereignty. But you must understand something crucial. Sovereignty has a cost. It requires you to step into a form of emotional solitude that most men avoid their entire lives. Because once you choose indifference, not the cheap imitation of pretending not to care, but the real version born from inner stability, you step away from the familiar cycle of seeking approval. You leave behind the predictable patterns of overthinking, the constant need for reassurance, the endless attempts to decode her ever-changing signals. And suddenly, the world grows quiet. No one prepares you for that silence. It feels like a cliff's edge, like standing on the threshold of a darker, heavier truth. Because indifference forces you to confront something you've spent years avoiding. Yourself. When you're not chasing her, who are? When you're not proving your worth, what is your worth? When you stop trying to earn affection, how much affection do you give yourself? These questions are the gates to your shadow. And every man who chooses calm over chaos eventually meets the version of himself he tried to outrun. Most men can't sit in that room. They reach for distractions, dates, validation, attention, rebounds, anything to avoid the void inside them. But the man who can face that inner silence, who can look directly into his own insecurities without flinching, becomes something rare, a man who is no longer ruled by them. She senses this, not through words, not through posture, but through something far deeper, your frequency. The emotional signal you emit when you are no longer driven by hunger or fear, when you are no longer seeking completion outside yourself, when your presence becomes sovereign, stable, unclaimed. In that moment, you stop being predictable. And predictability is the funeral of attraction. For the first time, she sees you as a mystery, not because you're hiding, not because you're playing games, but because your center is not up for negotiation. She feels drawn in by the very thing she cannot immediately understand. Your inner world no longer bends around her. Women are intuitive. They can feel when a man's identity collapses under desire. They can feel when his emotions leak through his words. They can feel when his interest is no longer a choice, but a need. But what they feel most intensely is when a man remains himself. Watch how the dynamic shifts. She begins to lean in, not because you pulled away, but because you stopped dissolving into her. She begins to wonder not because you crafted a strategy, but because you reclaimed your axis. She begins to fear something you once feared, the possibility of losing you. Do you see the inversion? Do you feel the reversal of the old pattern? This is not manipulation. This is the natural rebalancing of two forces once thrown out of alignment. Because attraction is not built on control. Attraction is built on contrast. And a man who holds his own contrast becomes unforgettable. In your silence, her mind fills the space. In your steadiness, her emotions awaken. In your indifference, her intrigue grows. Not because you denied her, but because you finally returned to yourself. But understand this. When you return to yourself, the world reacts. Especially the people who were once accustomed to the version of you that bent easily, that waited, that feared losing what was never fully his. When you reclaim your center, something paradoxical happens. Your presence becomes heavier, even in silence. You take up space without trying. And people, especially women, feel that weight in the air around you. It's not dominance, it's not intimidation. It's simply the gravity of a man who no longer negotiates his value. This gravity creates a tension, an emotional tension, that she feels even when nothing is said. A tension that pulls at the edges of her curiosity, the corners of her mind, the quietest chambers of her instinct. She begins to wonder, why does he feel different? Why does he not react the way others do? Why can't I read him? Mystery is not something you perform. It's something you become the moment your identity no longer hinges on her reaction. But let me take you deeper into the psychology of this shift. Human beings, men and women alike, are wired to seek equilibrium. When someone gives too much, the other unconsciously withdraws. When someone clings, the other instinctively loosens their grip. When someone overexpresses, the other quiets. This isn't cruelty. It's balance. It's the dance of emotional pressure. And for most of your life, you were the one adding pressure to the dynamic without realizing it. The overthinking, the rapid replies, the subtle desperation hidden under politeness, the emotional investment far heavier than the moment required. Each action a tiny weight on the scale, until the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Indifference removes the weight, not by acting aloof, not by pretending you don't care, but by eliminating the interdependency that created the pressure in the first place. When your emotions aren't fueled by fear, your presence no longer demands anything, and that absence of demand is felt as freedom, not coldness. She can approach you without feeling the invisible pull of expectation. She can speak to you without feeling your need beneath the surface. She can explore you without the fear of being consumed. This is why indifference attracts. It creates space. And space creates desire. But most men cannot hold that space for long. They collapse into old habits the moment they feel uncertainty. They interpret a delayed text as rejection. They interpret silence as disinterest. They interpret a shift in her tone as the beginning of the end. Each interpretation becomes a story, and each story becomes a reaction. But you listen carefully now, are no longer a man of reaction. You are a man of response. Responses are grounded, deliberate, sovereign. Reactions are driven by fear. Let me ask you something quietly, as if whispering to the version of you that still lives in your shadow. Why does uncertainty make you anxious? Why does silence stir panic? Why does distance ignite chaos? Because you believed her presence was proof of your worth. And so her absence felt like the collapse of your identity. But your worth is not tied to who chooses you. Your worth is tied to who you choose to become. And when you finally internalize this, truly internalize it, you reach a state very few men ever touch. A state where you want her, but you do not need her. And when a man reaches that state, something almost alchemical happens. The world that once felt overwhelming suddenly becomes small enough to hold in the palm of your hand. Your mind sharpens. Your emotional landscape steadies. The voices that once screamed inside you begin to quiet, until you realize they were never warnings. They were echoes of your insecurity. But insecurity cannot survive in a man who knows himself. This is where the true transformation begins, not in how she sees you, but in how you see yourself. Because you cannot command respect externally until you respect yourself internally. You cannot create intrigue until you find peace in your own mystery. You cannot inspire desire until you desire your own company more than anyone else's approval. That is the essence of indifference. Not detachment from her, but full attachment to your identity. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine standing in front of her, same woman who once stirred chaos inside you. Same smile, same voice, same presence. But this time, you feel something different. Not the familiar rush of adrenaline. Not the hunger for validation. Not the quiet ache of wanting to be chosen. Instead, you feel something still, something grounded, something calm. You feel you. She speaks. You listen not with need, but with presence. She flirts. You smile not because you're trying to win her, but because the moment is enjoyable. She pulls back. You do not chase. She leans forward. You do not retreat. You remain exactly where you are. This balance confuses her. Not in a malicious way, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that awakens something ancient, the instinct to pursue what cannot be immediately claimed. Women do not desire men who crumble under emotion. They desire men who can hold emotion without breaking. Your indifference becomes a mirror. It reveals not your coldness, but your strength. It shows that your emotions, while alive and deep, are not loose or chaotic. They do not spill uncontrollably. They do not dictate your every move. They do not hijack your dignity. This makes you unpredictable, not because you're inconsistent, but because you're stable. Most men are slaves to external stimuli, but you are no longer moved by every shift in her tone, every pause in her sentence, every flicker in her expression. You've stepped out of the chase, out of the performance, out of the cage of overthinking, and she feels the liberation in your silence. She feels the steadiness in your gaze. She feels the absence of grasping energy, and it draws her closer not because she wants to control you, but because she finally feels safe to explore you. This is where the dynamic reverses. She starts investing emotionally into you. She starts wondering about you. She starts thinking about you when you're not around. She starts noticing the details of your presence, the way you move, the cadence of your voice, the calm in your manner. She becomes aware of something she never saw before. You are not searching for a home inside her. You already have one within yourself. And this internal home is what makes a man irresistible. Because a woman will explore many men in her lifetime, but she will remember only the ones who did not need her to feel whole. But understand this. When a woman realizes you are whole without her, something profound awakens in her psyche. Not fear, not insecurity, but a form of awareness that reaches into her deeper instincts, an awareness that whispers, "This man does not orbit me, this man stands beside me," or he walks away. And that awareness changes everything. Because now, the dynamic is no longer about pursuit, it is about presence. Your presence. Not the presence of a man who needs to be chosen, but the presence of a man who chooses when to engage, when to reveal himself, when to open his world. Men who choose are rare. Men who choose slowly are unforgettable. Men who choose from a place of abundance rather than desperation hold a kind of influence that cannot be faked. And this is where the story deepens. Most men misunderstand indifference. They think it means pulling away, withholding affection, creating distance. But true indifference does not create distance. It creates value. Because when you no longer broadcast your fear, when your emotions no longer spill into the space between you, something miraculous happens. The space becomes quiet. And in that quiet, desire grows. Desire does not grow in noise. Desire grows in tension. Not tension created from games, but tension created from contrast. The contrast between your interest and your restraint, your warmth and your composure, your desire and your discipline. A man who can hold both sides of himself without collapsing into either becomes a paradox she cannot ignore. Let me reveal something few men ever understand. A woman is not drawn to chaos. She is drawn to depth. But depth requires stillness, and stillness requires mastery. You cannot be deep if you are always reacting. You cannot be still if you are always seeking. You cannot be whole if you are always abandoning yourself. This is why indifference is powerful, not because it withholds love, but because it refuses to sacrifice self-respect. When you are indifferent to outcomes, you are free. When you are free, you are authentic. When you are authentic, you are magnetic. Imagine a moment completely ordinary on the surface. You and her standing in a doorway, or sitting in a car, or walking side by side. She glances at you, expecting a familiar pattern, the pattern of a man ready to anticipate her every need, ready to fold himself into whatever shape will please her most. But instead, she sees something else. She sees a man who is present but not performing, engaged but not eager, interested but not invested in the outcome, a man who chooses her but does not depend on her. In that moment, a spark forms so small it's almost invisible, a spark of uncertainty, curiosity, attraction. Because she realizes she cannot control your attention. She cannot predict your reactions. She cannot shape your identity. And yet, you are still there, still calm, still grounded, still choosing to be with her without needing to be chosen back. This is the paradox she feels but cannot name. You are close, but not captured. Warm, but not weakened. Attentive, but not attached. And this paradox is the birthplace of her desire. Because desire lives not in possession, but in pursuit. But pursuit looks different when a woman begins it. It isn't loud. It isn't obvious. It isn't dramatic. It begins subtly in the quiet shifts of her behavior, in the new patterns she doesn't even realize she's expressing. She begins to linger a little longer when she speaks to you. She begins to ask questions she never bothered to ask before. She begins to reveal pieces of herself she once kept guarded, just to see how you respond. And here's the part most men misunderstand. She doesn't pursue because she feels insecure. She pursues because she finally feels safe. Safe to express interest without being overwhelmed. Safe to reveal desire without being swallowed whole. Safe to lean in without losing herself. Your indifference creates a world where she can relax into her femininity because nothing in your presence demands anything from her. Do you understand how rare that is? Most men try to extract certainty far too quickly. Do you like me? Where is this going? Why aren't you texting back? Did I do something wrong? Each question, a confession of fear. Each fear, a crack in the foundation. Each crack, a signal she cannot ignore. But you? You require no such reassurance. Your certainty comes from within. Your identity is not up for negotiation. Your value is not awaiting confirmation. You do not collapse into emotion, you contain it. And a man who contains his emotions doesn't suppress them. He masters them. This mastery changes the entire dynamic. Suddenly, she realizes something startling. There is nothing she can offer you that you cannot live without. And yet you are still there. Not trapped, not chasing, not begging, choosing. This is the kind of presence that makes a woman question herself, not in insecurity, but in introspection. She wonders what you see in her. She wonders what she must do to stay aligned with your frequency. She wonders who she becomes in your presence because your presence reveals her, not you. You see, when a man is needy, she sees him. When a man is indifferent, she sees herself. And the more she sees herself around you, her reactions, her desires, her uncertainties, the more invested she becomes. This is where the stakes rise. This is where the tension deepens. This is where the dynamic evolves. Because now, the question inside her shifts from, does he like me? To, why do I care so much if he does? That shift is massive. It changes not just her feelings, but her behavior. She becomes more thoughtful, more attentive, more intentional, more afraid of losing the connection not because she feels trapped, but because she finally recognizes the value in front of her. Your indifference didn't create fear, it created clarity. And clarity is what makes her realize something she never saw before. Your presence is not guaranteed. Not because you're playing a game, not because you're manipulating her, but because you live from a truth most men never discover. You are willing to walk away from anything that costs you your self-respect. And that willingness, quiet, calm, unforced, is what makes you powerful. It's what makes her choose you not out of pressure, but out of genuine desire. Not out of convenience, but out of admiration. Not out of loneliness, but out of recognition. She sees the difference now. She feels it in your energy. She remembers it in your silence. And she knows, deep down, that she will not find another man like you easily. And this is where the story takes its sharpest turn. Not a turn toward dominance, not a turn toward control, but a turn toward revelation. Because the moment she realizes you are not easily replaced, she begins to experience something she once unconsciously made you feel: the weight of possibility. The possibility of losing you. The possibility of misreading your intentions. The possibility that your path may eventually lead somewhere she cannot follow. Not because you are walking away, but because you are walking forward. And forward is a direction very few people are prepared to match. Watch her reactions here. Not the words are smoke. Look for the subtle shifts. She pays more attention to details. She mirrors your emotional pace. She becomes more deliberate with her presence. Her eyes linger. Her tone softens. Her guard lowers. Not because she is submitting, but because she is relaxing into the truth that your value is not fragile, that your interest is not desperation in disguise, that your presence is a gift she cannot demand, only receive. This is where the emotional stakes become real, because now she feels the tension you once felt, the quiet ache of uncertainty, the awareness of her own desire, the pull towards something she can sense but can no longer control. But here's the part most men miss. This is not the moment to exploit. This is the moment to remain steady. Because if you break your center now, if you collapse into your old patterns, if you crumble into overthinking, if you let the surge of her attention inflate your ego, you lose everything you've built. You must stay grounded. You must remain the same man who does not seek permission to be himself. The same man who does not panic in the unknown. The same man who does not chase validation like a thirsty wanderer seeking water. And here is the paradox. The more grounded you remain, the deeper she steps into the connection. Not as a reaction, but as a recognition. She recognizes the strength she once doubted existed. She recognizes the stability she once feared she would never find. She recognizes the man she can trust, not because he promises everything, but because he needs nothing. And trust is the soil where real desire grows. But you must understand something even deeper. Indifference is not a tactic. It is not a weapon. It is not a mask. It is the natural byproduct of a man who is fulfilled within himself. A man who does not lose sleep over things he cannot control. A man who does not negotiate his identity for affection. A man who does not dilute his essence to fit the moment. A man who can hold emotion without drowning in it. A man who can feel desire without falling apart. This type of man is rare, and rarity creates reverence, so she begins to see you differently. Not as an option, but as a standard. Not as a distraction, but as a possibility. Not as a man who wants her, but as a man worth wanting. And in that shift, quiet, subtle, powerful, a truth emerges. She is not difficult. She is responding to the man you have become. The man who found clarity in indifference. The man who chose himself without rejecting her. The man who stopped chasing affection because he began cultivating self-respect. And that man is unforgettable. But unforgettable does not mean untouchable. It does not mean above others, or beyond connection, or immune to emotion. In fact, the opposite is true. Because once you rise into this state of inner stability, you finally learn the most important truth of all. Indifference was never about distancing yourself from others. It was about rescuing yourself from the places you abandoned your own soul. You do not become cold, you become clear. You do not shut people out, you stop shutting yourself down. You do not reject vulnerability, you reject dependency. And in that clarity, you begin to understand women not as puzzles, not as tests, not as manipulators, but as human beings responding to emotional signals that run deeper than words. You begin to see patterns you were once blind to. Patterns inside her. Patterns inside yourself. Patterns inside the invisible current that flows between two people when desire, fear, and uncertainty are at war. But the war ends the moment you realize you no longer need the outcome to validate your worth. That is the threshold, the turning point, the awakening. When you reach it, something extraordinary happens. You no longer fear loss. Not because you expect people to stay, but because losing someone never means losing yourself. This is where your power peaks, not in control, not in dominance, but in understanding. Understanding that affection is not something to secure, connection is not something to force, love is not something to chase, respect is not something to beg for, it is something you embody, something you radiate, something the right people recognize without coercion, and the wrong people cannot appreciate even if you hand it to them. This is the final inversion of the dynamic. You stop questioning whether you are enough for her. You begin questioning whether she is aligned with the man you are becoming. And that shift changes everything. Your choices sharpen. Your boundaries strengthen. Your standards rise. Your emotional world becomes sacred. Your presence becomes intentional. You realize that the true meaning of indifference is this. You are indifferent to losing people who cannot meet you in the depth you now inhabit. Indifferent to drama. Indifferent to emotional chaos. Indifferent to the opinions that once controlled you. Indifferent to approval that once dictated your self-image. Indifferent to situations that compromise your peace. Because you have chosen sovereignty, you have chosen self-respect. You have chosen to rule your inner world rather than beg for permission to exist in someone else's. And as this truth settles, as it sinks like an anchor into the depths of your identity, you feel something rise inside you. Something steady. Something ancient. Something unmistakably powerful. You finally understand that the point was never to make women easier. The point was to become a man who cannot be broken by uncertainty. A man who can love without losing himself. A man who can give without collapsing. A man who can desire without drowning. A man who can walk away when needed, not in anger, but in honor. And that is the man she respects. The man she remembers. The man she chooses, not out of fear, but out of fascination. If you felt something shift in you during this journey, then subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me which moment struck you the deepest. Because your transformation doesn't end here. It begins here. And now, I leave you with one final question, a quiet riddle, a whisper to your shadow, the last doorway you must walk through on your own. When everything you want stands before you, will you remain the man who chases it, or the man it naturally moves toward? The answer will define your entire life.